My name is Tiffany Sanchez, and I'm a programming director with the Federalist Society, and it is my privilege to introduce Judge Singhal today. Judge Singhal has served on the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida since his appointment in 2019. He became the first Asian American judge first Asian American Article III judge in the Southern District of Florida. Before joining the federal bench, he was a judge on the State Circuit Court in Broward County, Florida, where he worked in the criminal, civil, and mental health divisions. Before becoming a judge, he worked as an assistant state attorney for 3 years and ran his own successful criminal defense practice for 18 years. Throughout his career, he has completed over 200 jury trials, which included 30 first-degree murder trials. He graduated from Wake Forest University School of Law, where he was the champion of the Craven-Braxton Moot Court competition. So with that, please join me in welcoming Judge Singhal.
Why Tiffany committed that to memory, I have no idea. I hope you can purge that from your mind so you have space for your studies going forward. It's really an honor to be here today, and I want to thank Federalist Society and University of Chicago, and specifically Sam and Tiffany and Jed for putting this together. I know many of you might have been expecting Judge Altman as well, and so I apologize for him that he's not here. He is caught up finishing a jury trial, and he didn't want the jurors to go into a third week, and frankly we were afraid that we might get stuck here tonight with weather, but I think I brought the sun with me, so it's a good thing. What I want to do really is talk to all of you about how I became a judge. I am going to talk about Judge Altman, even though he's not here. I won't put up the Clint Eastwood empty chair and talk to it like he's famous for having done. But unlike most FedSoc type presentations, you don't really have to save your questions for the end unless you really want to. I mean, I welcome questions throughout, and so we can have a discussion, because I really want to get you all to understand, if you have any questions about what we do as federal judges, and what you can do to become a federal judge if that's what you want to do in your career. So a couple of the reasons that Judge Altman and I speak together at many things, and we've spoken at a number of different law schools for Federalist Society, is because we're so different. He's tall and I'm short, he's Jewish and I'm Catholic, he was a DOJ and I was a criminal defense lawyer, he was a partner in a big law firm and I ran my own little law firm, frankly, you know, I always tell students in particular that life and a legal career is a marathon, but he's just a much faster runner than I am. And that's because he got this job when he was 36 years old. And I got it just after my 56th birthday. So not necessarily anything wrong with me. I just, you know, I'm more like the turtle in that race. But it does show you how you can get to this position in completely different lines in different ways. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about my history, and then also give you a little bit of advice depending on what you all want to do career-wise. I also am going to encourage you to stay in touch with me to the extent that you want to. Probably one of the main things that I do and enjoy doing is mentoring all sorts of students across the country in law and in the legal field. And part of that is because I think that we've lost really this concept of what law is about and what lawyers do. It would seem to me that if you apply to law school and you want to be a lawyer, that you are perfectly comfortable hearing points on different sides. It would seem to me that you would want to be able to hear the weakness of your opponent's argument so you could argue against it. In fact, if you were to do a jury trial and if your jurors were hung, that judge in that case is going to read those jurors an Allen charge. And that Allen charge is also called a dynamite charge, for example. And it specifically says, ladies and gentlemen, I can't ask you and force you to reach a verdict, but there's one thing I can ask of you. And that is that you go back into that jury room and try again, and try your hardest. And when you try your hardest, I want each of you to go around the table and talk about your weakest position. And then the other jurors are going to talk to you about that. And there's a lot of merit to that. There's a lot that goes into what we do as lawyers in terms of going forward. We have to make our best argument in the courtroom under the laws that are set for that courtroom. And you can't cancel out your opponent. You can't talk louder than your opponent. I mean, I guess there's that theory that if you don't have the facts and you don't have the law, then you just talk the loudest, right? I mean, I think you all may have heard that. That's one of the thousands of lawyer jokes out there. But the reality is you want to be able to thoughtfully advocate and present your position, whether it's in writing or verbally, to the court. And a lot of times you have to do it in both ways. Why? Because you might be arguing to the trial court and you might be arguing to the appellate court at the same time. So you always have to keep that in mind. You want to be persuasive at all times because this might not be the end of the road in terms of for your client. So how did I get to where I am? Graduated from Rice University in 1986 with a degree in political science, 33 years before Jed did. He graduated in 2019 with a degree in political science. I don't know what was, and you graduated in 2019 with what degree?
Political science.
Political science. So we have 3 owls. Well, Jed's not in the room right now, but 3 Rice Owls, political science majors. 2 of them were smart enough to come to University of Chicago for law school. The third, me, I went to Wake Forest for law school and graduated in 1989. While at Wake Forest, though, this group called the Federalist Society was just starting, and it was really born here in this law school. And it's no secret that this is my favorite law school in the country. And that's because of all of you, it's because of the things that you do, it's because of how open you all are to advocacy and to ideas. So, for example, Randy Barnett, really well-known, well-thought-of constitutional scholar, author of many books, teaches at Georgetown, con law classes. He had a talk recently at NYU. And once they heard what that talk was about, they decided we can't have this talk in our law school. And they put him at like some dormitory in some room and had 6 people that went and saw him. Meanwhile, when he came here later that week for the same talk, there was not enough room for the students to hear him. So that to me is a great example of the benefits of this law school that you've chosen. And that already has you set on this path towards success. At Wake Forest, I'm there. I didn't have anyone in my family who had been a lawyer before, so of course I went in thinking things about law school that probably didn't help. Like, for example, you're not gonna like con law, it's a boring class, you know, you have to take it. Let me tell you, if I could take con law again right now, I would. It's just such a great class. I know you all have taken it already, but I would, at this stage, to the extent that you still can, if you can build relationships with some of the professors here that are just well-known, outstanding professors, do so. I mean, you're not gonna have access to them in the way you have access to them now once you leave here. You will be able to, of course, be in touch with them, but to be able to sit in a class and listen to some of these folks talk, it's remarkable. Same thing with adjuncts. If you have an adjunct professor or someone from a big Chicago law firm coming to give a lecture, go sit and listen to that person. That hour of their time would cost their client $1,200. you get to come in and sit and listen to them. If you can go and see some fantastic trial attorney in trial for a day, go do it. People don't do that anymore, but there is so much to be learned from that. And I would really recommend that you do that. So the 200 plus jury trials that Tiffany mentioned, that was something that really I was so fortunate to have been able to do as a lawyer. At no point in my life while I was doing them did I realize how fortunate I was. You know, when you're preparing for these cases and you have a family at home and you're waking up at 3:30 in the morning to think about that closing argument because you really don't want to forget something, and then invariably you forget things. Invariably you do. And when do you remember them? You all may have heard this before. It's truly when you're driving home after the closing argument, when the jury's out, you remember that point that you forgot to make. And so that's what I'm kind of telling you about. You've got to work hard and you've got to make these points when you can, and you've got to learn these styles that different lawyers and different judges might have. And so avail yourselves of these opportunities at this law school and here in Chicago to see some of those things. So Wake Forest, I go there and I am trying to figure out at that point between law review and moot court, because for some reason I didn't think I could do both. And so I chose moot court, but it worked out well for me. Wake Forest had an internal competition that was very highly thought of, brought in some great judges from throughout the country, and I was able to win that competition as a 2L. And so as a result, I got invited to argue in front of the U.S. Court of Military Appeals as a 3L. And that's a pretty cool thing, to argue in front of an appellate court when you're still in law school. I lost the case, but still, you know, I was able to argue. And then the Craven competition is a national Fourth Amendment competition. And so I was able to do that and win that. And so that's how my resume kind of stood out a little bit, even though I wasn't on law review. I applied for federal clerkships. In fact, the 2 judges, and that's another mistake. I only applied to 2 judges. Apply to a bunch of judges if you want to do a federal clerkship. I applied to these 2 judges who happened to be in the courthouse where I now serve. They're like 90 now, but in any case, they're no longer in the courthouse where I now serve. But I didn't get those clerkships, and my point there is you don't have to have done a federal clerkship to be successful or to become a federal judge. Now, on the other hand, let's go to Judge Altman, who's not here. He applied for a district court clerkship. He goes and he interviews for the district court clerkship, and during the interview, the judge says, you know, I don't have anything for you, but there's someone else who might. And of course, Judge Altman's thinking, boy, that doesn't sound good. I mean, where's he gonna take me? Well, that district court judge walked Judge Altman over to Judge Marcus's office, who's at that time an appellate judge on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal, and Judge Marcus hired him. So, you know, things work out differently sometimes. You've got to put yourself out there for that. Now, of course, Judge Altman's a little bit different than me. He's about 6'3". He was the quarterback for Columbia. He was the closer on their baseball team. Of course, if he were here, I would tell him, but neither of the teams was any good. But, you know, that he had himself out there and he did those things. And then he went to Yale Law School, and he's not here, and he's upset that he's not here. And so he thinks that you all are going to hold it against him. So flood him with with law clerk applications. That way he'll, you know, right now he's going to look at those Chicago applications and say, I got to hire some Chicago students for law clerk. So graduated from law school, and I had clerked in Fort Lauderdale for my 2L summer. And why did I choose Fort Lauderdale? It's because my wife had matched for her medical residency in Miami, and so I decided, okay, I've got to forget my North Carolina job, I got to look for something in Fort Lauderdale. Now back then, we didn't have the internet. So, you know, you couldn't go and find jobs on the internet. We had these books that you can hardly hold with one hand called Martindale Hubbell. I don't know if you've seen them, they're yellow books, they're one for each letter, like big encyclopedias, and you would open them up and you would look for someone who graduated from your law school, who was in a certain jurisdiction, and that's what I did. And so I was fortunate enough to get hired on at a law firm in Fort Lauderdale, and I was there for my 2L clerkship. I went with them after I graduated in Wake Forest, and I was there for a year, and I was making decent money back then. Not like the $215 starting salary in Big Law now. It was $37,000 back then. It was 1989. As I was working there, I realized, I've got this energy to try cases, but these law firms aren't trying cases, and I'm probably not going to get into a courtroom to try cases for some years, and by then, I don't know if I'll have the same energy. So I went ahead and went to the state attorney's office, which is like the district attorney's office. It's in the state court level, and $18,500 a year. So think about that. I know that's 1990, but $18,500 a year. What does that pay for maybe one of your quarters here?
Not even.
Yeah, so not even. So I go to the state attorney's office, and I started on June 1st, 1990. On June 4th, 1990, and June 1st I think was a Friday, on June 4th, 1990, I'm picking my first jury. And that's part of how the state court system works. It's kind of like almost a triage system. You're given this whole box of cases and said, okay, go get ready, and you try what you have to try. Now, you start off at a county court system, so I was trying DUI cases. But the luck that life dealt me, I was assigned to a judge named Barry Seltzer, who had just come from the Department of Justice, and he was a county court judge. He ended up being a county court judge for a short time until he became a United States magistrate judge. So I all of a sudden had this entree into the federal system for no reason at all but dumb luck. How do you take advantage of that kind of entree into the system? You do a good job when you're in front of that person that you randomly got assigned to. So during the 3.5 years I was at the state attorney's office, I tried 72 jury trials. And that sounds like an awful lot, but truly, these DUI trials, sometimes it's 2 a week, but the beauty of it is the jury selection process. Being able to be in front of groups of people you've never met before and just talk to them and ask them questions and get them to divulge to you things that they wouldn't even tell like their brother or sister, but then what's jury selection all about? Ladies and gentlemen, we want to pick a fair and impartial jury on this case. So, have any of you ever been part of a similar case before? Have you ever had a situation in your life where a family member was arrested for DUI or in a civil context? Have you ever been the victim of any kind of medical malpractice type of case? And so you ask them these questions, and then they tell you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I never remembered this. Yes, 20 years ago, here's what happened. And then you look at them and you say, okay, can you put that out of your mind? Can you be fair and impartial? What I just told you to remember, can you now forget about it, even though you hadn't thought about it for 20 years until you came in here, because we need someone who's fair and impartial. So that's what jury selection is. But what you have to do as a lawyer is you've got to look at this group and you've got to say, okay, who are the 9 people in this group who are the best for my case? Or who are the 10 or 12 or 6? And if any of you have seen The Lincoln Lawyer, that's really pretty true. You have the prosecutor knocking off who the prosecutor thinks is the best for the defense knocking off who the defense attorney thinks is the best for the prosecutor, and then you're left with a middle. But what you got to do is really kind of get in there and build that rapport. You're never going to be in a position where you are going to take people who have, for their whole life, developed some kind of deeply held belief, and in your 20 minutes, 30 minutes, hour and a half with them as a group, get them to let go of that deeply held belief. That's not what jury selection is about. What it's about is when they go back in that jury room, I like that guy with the purple tie better. I don't remember his name, but he's the one I can trust. And so that's kind of what you're doing, right? And that's what you're doing throughout life. You're making these relationships and building these relationships, right? So, I got all that experience trying those cases as a prosecutor, and then in 1993, 94, by then we had a child that was 7 or 8 months old, and my thought is 18,005, not you, your sister. My thought was $18,500 isn't gonna pay for the house that we need for, to live. So if there's any time where I could be a criminal defense lawyer, I'm gonna try it. And so that's when I started as a criminal defense lawyer. And over the course of time, again, some interesting things happened. In 1998, Jeb Bush was elected governor of Florida. Just prior to him being elected, a law went into effect called 1020 Life. This law says that basically if you use a firearm in the commission of a case, it's a 10-year minimum mandatory. If you discharge the firearm, it's a 20-year minimum mandatory. If you injure someone, then it's 25 to life minimum mandatory. So now all of a sudden we had these minimum mandatories that were in place, and it's really easy to think that, okay, the public's gonna be in favor of these minimum mandatories, and prosecutors and police will be in favor of them too, but really prosecutors were not in favor of them. Why? Because it bound their hands as well. I might have a great case as a defense lawyer. My client might be willing to take probation, might be willing to take 2 years, 3 years, but the prosecutor couldn't offer any less than 10. So what happened? All of these cases, I had to go to trial on. Why? Because the worst you can do is 10 and they're offering you 10. Nobody's gonna take that. What happened is I end up trying over the course of the next 18 years, 132 criminal defense cases. Again, picking juries, getting into those cases, and 30 of those cases were first-degree murder cases. And so I developed this reputation as a strong criminal defense lawyer, but that's not normally the kind of person that gets appointed to be a judge, right? And so at some point in that line of trials, at some point, I thought, I think I want to apply to be a judge. There were no Asian American judges in the state of Florida, none. That seems odd, right? Because in Illinois or New Jersey or California, New York, there are a lot, but in Florida there were none. And so that was part of why I applied. By then we had 3 kids. So when I applied and didn't get it, I didn't want them to see that I'm giving up. And so over the course of a 6-year period, I applied to be a state court judge 17 times. And on the 17th application, Governor Rick Scott appointed me, and it was his first judicial appointment. So, moral of that story. The governor before Rick Scott was Charlie Crist. If Charlie Crist would have appointed me to be a state court judge, 1, I'd still be a state court judge. 2, I wouldn't be at University of Chicago talking to this great group of students. But, as luck would have it, it was then Governor Scott that appointed me. And what's the best way to become a federal judge? To know a senator. Guess what? In 2018, Rick Scott gets elected to be senator from Florida. And so at that point in time, things kind of fall into place. So, couple things I should tell you. In a state like Florida, where at that time, when we applied, 2017, where there was 1 Democrat senator, Bill Nelson, 1 Republican senator, Marco Rubio, it was common to have a judicial nominating commission. We had this judicial nominating commission that had 36 lawyers on it, and the 36 lawyers would interview you to determine whether your name would get sent to the White House. The application for that particular job is so onerous that I'm literally telling you to print it out and start working on it now. I will tell you that I pulled the application, And I didn't think I could get it done. I mean, they wanted every place that I had lived from my 18th birthday going forward. And for someone who's at that time in their mid-50s, that's a lot harder than someone who's, 30. So one of the ways, there was one place that I forgot, that I knew I had lived, but I couldn't figure out the address. And so they give you a handler, someone that will help you when you eventually get to the White House level. And I remember when I was at that level, I asked the handler, I said, if I can't remember this address, is it a big deal? Oh yeah, it's a big deal. The FBI will find it. If you can't find it, the FBI will find it. Then they'll wonder why you didn't tell us the address. And they'll wonder what happened at that apartment. And, so everything. So, luckily, being the pack rat that I am, I had saved every letter that my wife and I had written to each other over our whole time together. And sure enough, on the return address of a letter, on the mailing address of something that she had sent me was the address. And so little things like that you all won't have to worry about if you pull that application now and just start filling it in and keep a running application for the next 20 years of your career. They want to, believe me, they want to know everything. They want to know every time you've spoken in a group like this. They want a transcript of what you said. If there's no transcript, they want a video. If there's no transcript and no video, they want the notes you use. You will notice, I never use notes. Never use notes. There's nothing to turn over. Usually there's no video. So that's a little tip. I mean, if you're okay doing it, you should do it. But otherwise, if you speak from notes, keep the notes. Keep it in a file. Just keep all of that stuff. So in any case, 2017 is when we all applied to be federal judges. And they were expecting about 100 applicants for the Southern District of Florida. Now, the Southern District of Florida is a jurisdiction that goes from Key West all the way up to Fort Pierce, so kind of along the eastern curve of Florida. And there are 93 or 94 districts, as you know, and for the period ending June 2022, the Southern District of Florida was again #1 for jury trials and #1 for days of jury trial. So it's a really busy district. It's a good district. I would say SDNY and Southern District of Florida are two of the districts that people really like to go to. It also is a beautiful area to live, and so that also generates some applications as well. But in any case, they were expecting 100 applications, but the application was so hard to do that they got about 50 applications. They gave 24 of us interviews. They sent 10 of our names to the senators. So now we're going back to 2017 in December. December 2017, we get calls from Senator Rubio. We all fly up there, and interestingly enough, they went ahead and interviewed all of us in D.C. And I always wondered, I was looking at the paper and I knew Senator Rubio was in South Florida like 2 days before the interview. But anyway, it was nice. It was a nice trip to D.C. So we interview, and I'm thinking, well, are we going to hear from Senator Nelson also? Didn't. Get back to Florida like 2 hours after the flight lands. Hear from Senator Nelson, need you to go back to D.C. So go back to D.C., interview with Senator Nelson. And then we just waited. We waited for a little while. And then, ironically, the whole group of us, along with hundreds of other people, are at the Florida Federalist Society Conference in Orlando. And this is February of 2018, so 5 years ago. And Judge Altman's phone goes off. And it's the White House calling to set up his interview. So now he's got a decision to make. Are we all getting interviews, or is it just me? Am I going to tell my friend Raag that I just got a call from the White House and, we're getting this interview? And so sure enough, he tells us. And no more calls come. Now, when you're applying for a job like this, you think you're the most important thing. You're the big thing going on in D.C. Well, you're not. They got real work to do. They've got judges from all over the place, #1, and they have like wars and things that they have to do, right? So as it turned out, Altman is first alphabetically, they called him first, they got busy, and then everyone else's phones started ringing later on, about 2 hours later. We fly up there, we do our interviews. At the interview, I learn that Senator Nelson is not going to return the blue slip supporting me. So this is something important for you all to know. The blue slip tradition is very important. The fact that he wouldn't support me is his right to do so. We get confirmed because of presidential nomination and senatorial advice and consent. This talk about getting rid of the blue slip system, it's bad. That's my opinion. I'm not going to have a case that says that comes in front of me, but you all really, to the extent that you're kind of thinking of it as a political issue, Senator Nelson had every right to block me. He did. He lost the election. I'm a federal judge. Right? So, the rules. We all play with the rules. It's all good. So, now, we do these interviews in 2018, and nothing happens, and there's a lot of politics going on. And then April 2019 comes along, and none of us are federal judges at that point still. And so something happens in April 2019 called the nuclear option. And I don't know if any of you ever read about this, but at that point in time, up until then, what would happen is a senator could ask for cloture on a nomination, which means it's ready to go, and then they would have 30 hours of debate, up to 30 hours of debate on each individual. The nuclear option was that the 30 was reduced to 2 hours. The purpose of this is that it afforded Senator McConnell the opportunity to get more judges voted on, because there were so many judges in the pipeline. So the nuclear option was Roy Allman. And that's another reason why we love coming and talking together, because he can talk to you about that. Now, I tell him, well, it's because, again, you're first in the alphabet. That's why Allman was the nuclear option. The reality was, Roy is an exceptional candidate. Like I said, Columbia undergrad, Yale Law School, went from there to clerk on the 11th Circuit, from there to Department of Justice, where he won like the United States Assistant U.S. Attorney of the Year award. Went from there to Podhurst Orszag, which is a big law firm in Miami. Left after he settled some case for $980 million. So this is the kind of person that we're talking about. Who's going to vote against him? Well, 33 people voted against. But still, who's going to vote against that person to be a federal judge? So he was the nuclear option, and that got kind of the pipeline opened a little bit. And then eventually, my nomination is kind of out there, and it comes up, and it's December of 2019, and I'm told, it's probably going to be February of 2020, because they're getting ready to do this thing that's a little bit more important than your nomination, and it's some impeachment trial. So I'm like, oh, great, and if that happens, who knows what happens with my nomination. All of a sudden, I'm sitting there in court in a trial in the state court system, and I hear about my cloture motion going through because people start texting me because they read it on Twitter. So the next thing I want to tell you is, it's not like they're in touch with you and they call and say, hey, this is going to happen for you today. I mean, it's like on Senate Cloakroom or John Doe or something like that. And then somebody texts you, and then everybody knows before you do. Plus, in these courthouses, your internet service is so bad that they've been texting you for half the day and you didn't know it. So, in any case, December 16th of 2019, the cloture motion goes through. December 19th is going to be my vote. And again, the thought was, hey, it's probably just going to be a roll call vote. And I come to find out that I'm going to be in this group of about 10 judges that are voted on, and then they're going to move on with the impeachment stuff. Well, they started to do the impeachment stuff first. And so they had this vote on the impeachment. So my trivia question is not was he nuclear option, it's who's the first judge who was confirmed after the impeachment vote. And that's who you get. So you got nuclear option here who's not here, and you got first judge confirmed after the impeachment vote. Luckily, from everything I've read, still it's a lifetime job, so I don't have to. So then going forward, so we start this job as a federal district judge. What do? In the Southern District of Florida, typical docket is about 400 cases, 100 criminal, 300 civil. The criminal cases I handle alone unless one of my law clerks really is interested in them. And if one of my law clerks is really interested in a criminal case, then they might go ahead and work on that. The civil cases are divided among 3 law clerks. And so what happens is the cases come in, we all discuss them, and we write some pretty detailed orders on those. And what you have to remember is that the district court level is really that wide part of the funnel in the federal system. I mean, we're the ones who make those factual findings. We're the ones who see all of these cases. And ultimately, the papers really write about the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court hears maybe 80 to 90 cases in a year. And I think at the federal district court level, we're hearing about 300,000 or so. So you can really get an idea of the importance to the citizenry of what we do. We sit in an appellate capacity on bankruptcy matters and social security matters. Might not sound all that interesting, but for a law clerk, it's not the least interesting either. I mean, it's exposure to different kinds of cases. As far as the civil cases that we do, everything from hurricane damage, because there's diversity. Most of those hurricane damage cases go to the state court system, but if it happens to be an insurance company that's outside the state of Florida, then they're going to want it in federal court. Why are they going to want it in federal court? It's because typically defendants and corporate defendants get a better result in federal court than in state court. Going up to the higher end of the civil cases, it could be cases dealing with the SEC and somebody who's defrauded people out of hundreds of millions of dollars, fake stock, pump and dump kind of things, all sorts of things like that. On the criminal side, illegal reentry, which is basically people that aren't supposed to be in the country coming in. We get a lot of that in South Florida. You get those in Arizona, Texas, those areas as well. Going up to Ponzi scheme, murder, bank robbery, Hobbs Act, so all sorts of things like that. As far as trials go, you know that the general thought process is trials are a thing of the past, and that there aren't that many trials anymore. And I think across the country, that's pretty true, but we always have trials in the Southern District of Florida. I don't know why. It's a function, I think, of volume and of the types of cases. Unfortunately, on the civil side, the cases that typically go to trial are not ones that should. There are ones that probably should have been resolved with some kind of dismissal or the parties agreeing to something, but they just couldn't get to that agreement. So I've found that the cases that I've tried on the civil side haven't been the most interesting in terms of what you would normally think. That having been said, Judge Altman's trial right now is a patent case, and that's the kind of case that really has issues that are quite different than normal. His case right now, for example, it's about a bicycle wheel. And what happened is the initial inventors of the wheel, they developed this wheel, and then this other group made some design changes to the wheel, and it can save racers like 2 seconds on a mile. That's what that case is about, is all of that, intricate patent stuff. So he's actually kind of concerned. I mean, are the jurors really keeping up with the experts on that? I'm starting a products liability case on Monday. It's a pretty interesting case. It deals with an implant, a mesh implant,
a woman who got very sick after that. So you have all sorts of different cases and different levels of that. So what do you think? 1 o'clock, should we go to questions or what? Because I know you all have classes to go to and all of that. What's best?
We can start with questions. if
Sure,
that's
sure,
okay.
sure. Anyone have any questions or any thoughts? What kind of career goals out there that I've talked to maybe 7 or 8 of you, but anything at all? Yeah.
Thank
We'll
you.
kind of go that way.
Yeah. I really appreciate you coming out to speak to us. I'm curious what kind of factors you think should be relevant in deciding how long to stay at a certain job.
Okay. So it's interesting. I get these applications for clerkship, and all of you folks that apply are just top notch, and I wonder how you've done all these things. And so some thought is, okay, at some point I've got to find a job and stay at that job for a while, right? A clerkship decision, it's typically a 1 or 2 year decision. And really, I think if you're being offered that, you've got to do whatever is best for you. The theory is 1 year is best for the clerk, 2 years is best for the judge. Because in that first year, that's where you're really, learning a lot and getting used to it. And then that second year, you have all this institutional knowledge, and so you could do more for the judge. My thought is really for you as a person, if you're being offered 1 year or 2 year, and you aren't someone who's like, yeah, I really want 2 year, then 1 year is probably best. As far as law firms go, a lot of that is going to be based on economics. So if you have no loans to pay back, if you're in a good position there, right? That will alter the calculus in terms of how you make that decision. For example, your dream might be to be a prosecutor, or to be a criminal defense lawyer. If that's your dream, you know that you're going to be starting at a different pay grade. So there's 2 things you can do. There's some loan forgiveness programs that apply if you take that kind of job. Problem is, loan forgiveness programs typically are 10 years at the job, 120 consecutive payments. So you have to keep that in mind. You also have to weigh that job in terms of the other benefits, healthcare, pension, things like that. So there are some benefits for doing that. Partnership track them. If you're at a law firm, don't stay for 10 years if you think at year 3 the writing's on the wall that you don't want to be a partner or they don't want you to be a partner. What's the point then? Other than that money that you're making, if that's better than what you think you'd be getting somewhere else, and you can live with it in terms of your job and your mental status, that's great. But typically, if the writing's already on the wall in year 3, it's not going to change by year 8 or 10. So, any follow-up on that, though, or does that make sense? Okay,
Appreciate it.
great.
Thank you, Judge. I guess I was curious about your views on voir dire and for both being a former defense attorney and then being a judge. And there's been a lot of criticism about the use of peremptories and kicking off jurors for different reasons. I was curious if you feel that there are any reforms you think would be helpful for the process to make it work better, or if you think that there are merits to the current process that are not adequately understood by critics or by the public.
Sure, okay. So the state court system and the federal court system are quite different, first of all. In the state court system, and I can really speak to Florida better, but I think it's fairly uniform. Your typical voir dire is much more lawyer-oriented than in the federal system. In the federal system, it's almost all done by the judge. Some judges will give the lawyers 10, 15, 20 minutes tops. And again, what can you do in 10, 15, or 20 minutes? If you have even 20 jurors, you're talking about 30 seconds to a minute per juror. So you're not going to be doing anything other than just globally trying to really ingratiate yourself and build your level of trust with them. Now, in the federal system also, it's typical in most federal districts that there's no backstrikes. So let me tell you what backstrikes are. When you go ahead and you pick a jury, there's 30 people out there, and you're looking for the 6 that you want, and you've gone through the first 10, and you have 6 jurors, but you still have some challenges left, and now you're on juror number 11, and you love juror number 11. Judge, we're going to strike juror number 1. So in the state system, you can do that. you're looking at this whole panel collectively. In the federal system, we deal with each juror individually. Once both sides say they're good with juror number one is juror number one. And then on to juror number two. And now if you get to number 11, and 11 is just the greatest, you still have one, so the federal system is much more streamlined. Peremptories are critical. Peremptories have been used in the past, if you go back to Batson, if you go to cases like that, people have said that they've been used to exclude, can't even say minorities, but to exclude groups from jury service. The reason I can't say minority is in the Florida court system, in the state court system, everybody qualifies for Batson. Everyone is a member of a group, other than if you're young. So that law, Batson, which started like this, has been broadened judicially to something that's completely unworkable. And the idea is, it's to really kind of almost get rid of the peremptory challenge. Peremptory challenges are not cause challenges. You're not supposed to have to give a reason as to why. It could be, I just don't hit it off with this guy. Well, that's not a good enough reason under Batson, right? So I do think there's a significant level of, or lack of understanding in terms of how the jury system works. I think most of the critics of the jury system have never sat on a jury, have never sat through a jury selection, have never been in court to even observe a jury selection. Frankly, I will tell you, I would have loved to sit on a jury. I was called for jury service a couple times and quickly excluded, and I was like, no, I really want to serve. Like, well, we don't want you to serve. And so that happens too. As far as reforms go, look, I really was helped by the fact that I was able to talk to jurors in the jury selection process. As a judge, sure, I want to refine it, and I think, yeah, I think a lot of the lawyers' questions may kind of be peripheral, but I don't know. I mean, I think that there's often times where we try to come up with a complaint, but the solution is not better than what we have. So.
Thank you, Judge. So, first, as a prosecutor, then as a criminal defense attorney, now as a judge. And this is kind of a deep question, but how has your Catholic faith kind of informed your roles in all three of those, if you can answer?
Sure. So, to me, the Catholic faith always gives you something to fall back on. It's not something that informs my decision-making in the sense that I am not going to think what would be right if I was looking at the Bible, because I think it's two completely different things. But it gives you peace. And I think that's the best answer I can give you. I know it's a very much shorter answer than you are looking for, but really I think that it does, and it's interesting, because if you look at the U.S. Supreme Court now, much has been written about that. 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic. But historically, it's 15 out of 115. Historically, very few Supreme Court justices have been Catholic. It's just that they're all on at the same time now. So, yes?
Hi, Judge Singhal. I was curious if you can talk a little bit about the trust-building process. You mentioned both when you're selecting the juries, but obviously as a defense attorney, sometimes you're coming in to a group that just sort of intrinsically doesn't trust your client, and how you prepare and sort of translate that trust from the legal perspective to the jury and also to your client.
Sure. That's very difficult, because we have this presumption of innocence, and the jurors have heard it. They will often say they believe in it, but they really haven't thought about it. And, there's that whole theory where there's smoke, there's fire. And so they figure, okay, that person's sitting there, and the person that's sitting there is there only because they must have done something wrong. They wouldn't take somebody off the street, and an innocent person, and put them sitting there. So, you do want to do things as a criminal defense lawyer to personalize your client. And it can be little things, like you get up and you come back and you put your hands on your client's shoulders and say, I have the privilege of representing this individual here. I say individual, but use their name. And then of course you want to dress them appropriately, and so you've seen that you don't have someone that's going to trial in their prison clothes, but at the same time you don't want to dress them like this, and then they're sitting there in front of the jury like this all the whole time. And the jury's like, what's that guy trying to do? So you have to try to kind of temper that a little bit. And then I think what you want to do, and this is kind of what I would always do. So let's say they brought in 30 jurors, right? And as the defense, you get to go second. So you have the judge's voir dire, you have the prosecutor's voir dire, and so I would memorize everybody's name and occupation. So then when I got up, I would say, okay, George, you want to go to Miami, right? And then I would start talking with them about that. And then I would say, and you're also named George, right? And then I would start talking with them about that. And Jane, your question was really good, but, right? And then Sarah, how about you? What do you think? I mean, do you like this presentation? And you kind of build rapport that way by calling people out, by name, and they're like, wait a second, they really care about me. Luckily I'm able to memorize your names, and yeah, I might be but I mean, for now, I'm just trying to make sure that you think I'm more trustworthy than that one. And that's really, I mean, it's like techniques like that.
We have time for about 2 more questions.
Oh, because you all have class at 1:30?
Yes.
Okay. And then if anyone doesn't have class, I can hang out a little bit. Yeah? Okay, all right.
So, Florida's like Boston these days. I'm just curious, your thoughts on the current state of the Florida legal market, the future of the Florida legal market.
Come on down. I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great. We've had, in Miami, 10 big law firms during COVID that are down there. I think there'll be more. It's a fantastic place to live, fantastic for young people. No income tax. And really, I will call out my former law clerk who just left and went to Weil. He knows that I'm using this as an example. He sent me a text the other day, and he said, I've been robbed. And I said, what happened? And he said, look at what they did to my bonus. And so he went from clerking for me in Florida, he's at Weil in New York, which is he returned to the firm, $50,000 clerkship bonus. He got to put $21,000 in the bank. That's after federal, state, city, borough, I don't know what other taxes. Yeah, the taxes. It was like, it's unbelievable. So anyway, that number's a lot higher in terms of what you get to put in the bank in Florida.
Question. Do you think the strength lies more so in litigation or transactional work? A lot of financial institutions are moving down to Florida, but you guys also
I can't really answer that question in terms of which one's more or less. So in my courthouse, I mean, we've got 4 bankruptcy judges. I mean, they're busy, So I mean, we've got all sorts of different types of work. I mean, if you're interested at all, I would definitely tell you to check it out. I mean, I hear a lot of people are looking at Florida and Texas. We've been in Florida for 35 years now. I mean, longer than by far than I've been anywhere else. So, I mean, I love it. Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious, how you'd recommend navigating between doing work at the trial level and the appellate level. It seems like in law school you get kind of more exposure to the appellate level. We have a moot court competition, we don't have a trial team. So just how would you recommend navigating between those two?
Sure. So it's a very personal question in terms of what you like and what someone else likes. If you can avail yourself of the opportunity, if some opportunity arises where someone says, we want you to join this firm and have an appellate law practice, and we're going to give you these appellate cases, I would jump on that. I don't think that happens, though. I mean, it is just not easy to get into an appellate law practice. And, I'll give you an example. So my 3 lawyers in the family now. My brother-in-law clerked on the First Circuit. He's the only person, by the way, in history to ever turn down a clerkship from Justice Breyer. My nephew clerk on the 6th Circuit. My son is going to clerk on the 11th Circuit. I'm the only one without a clerkship. So, you don't have to do these appellate level clerkships. I would have loved to have done one thinking that would get me into an appellate practice. But there's no guarantees there. Appellate practices are very hard to come by. If that's what you really want to do, and if you get that offer, I wouldn't worry about trial work. Because the way that it works in a real appellate practice, a lot of times you're sitting at the trial too. You're sitting in there, you're advising them, object to this, object to that, preserve that issue. So, you get to do both. As far as navigating, that's a real difficult one. Yes.
Yeah, so thank you for coming up. I'm wondering whether between your work as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, whether you have a preference for one, something that stood out.
Sure. And again, that's a really personal one. I will tell you, I really have just a phenomenal job right now. I love it. But there's not one day in my life that I don't think about being a criminal defense lawyer. As a lawyer, nothing more rewarding. I mean, a lot of it depends on how good you are. There's plenty of people. Yeah, there's plenty of people who will just go in and take a case, and it's more for the money than for anything. I wasn't the greatest businessman, but I loved being a criminal defense lawyer, and I've always been good on my feet, things like that, and so you can kind of use that, So, did you have anyone? I know she's getting up. So.
As a practicing attorney, what does it look like to participate in the Federalist Society?
So that's an interesting question. I will tell you a couple things real quick. I think the Federalist Society counts on me, counts on a lot of people, counts on me to come and talk for a number of reasons. I look different than people think Federalist Society members look, right? And I have a criminal defense background, and I have all of these things that don't check the Federalist Society boxes. But I will tell you, and I'll go back real quick, just give me 1 minute. I'll just go back to Senator Nelson's interview with me. And I will tell you one thing he said. He looks at me, and I won't do his accent. You could do his accent, actually. He says, so what exactly is this Federalist Society? And now I'm thinking, this is a guy who graduated from University of Virginia Law School. I don't know. And you have to think. Sometimes they'll ask you a question because they kind of want to get under your skin, and sometimes because they really want to know. And I said, well, Senator, really, the society stands for the thought that you're the boss and we follow you. You make the law, and then we follow what you do. It's all on you. So he says, well, then you all need a better PR representative. That's how he said it. And then he turns to me and he says, we didn't have that when I was in law school, so I don't know what it is. So look, at that point, you kind of have to move the conversation because you don't want to get in that with him. Because under that theory, he didn't have Roe v. Wade when he was in law school. So he shouldn't be upset with dogs either, right? But they hadn't landed a man on the moon, yet he thinks he's an astronaut. But you can't say these things. You kind of have to go for it. I absolutely think Federalist Society is one of the best things that you can join and be part of because it fosters debate. It encourages people from different viewpoints to come and talk to you, and that's what is inherently, that's like in the definition of what a lawyer is, right? And so I think you're good there. I think you do have to look at the firms that you're maybe applying to, and unfortunately, you may have to emphasize other things more than others for certain firms, but I think it's a good thing.
Thank you all